Sometimes you deal with things in life that bug you, and sometimes you get to be the bug. Hello everyone, Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we are here on my main account to talk about Aphidus, I don't know. The bug dude, the bug mythical from the Dark Elves. He is interesting. He does not have particularly great reviews. He has been buffed once, and many people don't really feel that's been enough, but I did pull him recently, and I figured I would showcase him a little bit. I've built him up. I have not booked him, so this is an unbooked demonstration of him. But I figure we'll take him around, do some damage testing. We'll take him into Hydra. I think his kit will actually work very well in Hydra. At least his Form 1 will work. And we'll even compare him against Thor, which I think is actually a pretty fair comparison for a legendary damage dealer versus a mythical damage dealer, just to kind of see how everything works out. First of all, what does this guy even do? Well, we have Aphidus the Hivelord here, and he is a pretty sharp-looking champion. He's got this green bug-like aesthetic, and then, of course, he has the other aesthetic right here, which is just definitely the full-on bug. So, you know, kind of a cool look overall. It kind of looks more like a raid boss than it does a raid champion, but that's fine. Let's go take a look at what his kit actually does, however. So first of all, as a mythical, I'm going to ignore this skill here because this is his transform. So this one right here, this A4, I guess it would be, he is always his transform, so we're just going to ignore that. A1 attacks one enemy, places decreased defense for 2 turns, also puts a perfect veil on this champion for 1 turn. Perfect veil is great for keeping people from being feared, and overall very good for keeping them alive. So he's got some way to help keep himself alive, which is good because he doesn't have a lot of HP or defense for a mythical. I mean, his defense is not horrible for a pretty high attack. Okay speed, okay other stats as well. The A2 attacks all enemies before attacking, places a 50% increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. So he's got a self-buff increase attack. That is great, and it's for everybody, which is also really, really good for partnering him for doing damage. We'll ignore 25% of the defense if they are not under HP burn. We'll ignore 50% if they are under HP burn. So if you compare him with another HP burn champion, that is good as well. He then increases the duration of all enemy debuffs by 1 turn. So that's actually pretty exciting as well. So increase the duration of debuffs, very, very helpful as well. So, and then he provides HP burn. So attacks all enemies, damage increases by 25% against targets under any debuffs. So he's got multiple ways to ignore defense or increase his damage. So this form looks like it should be smacking pretty hard. Instantly activates any HP burn debuffs on the enemy. If they are not under HP burn, then places an HP burn. And I'm kind of curious to see how this works, because if he activates the HP burn and it goes away, then will he then place a burn afterwards? Because if he does, that is actually really, really good. If not, that's a little less exciting, but still pretty good. Finally, he's got a passive here. For each time this champion places an HP burn debuff, decreases the target's defense by 3%. Each HP burn debuff on the enemy team increases champion's crit damage by 10%, stacks up to 100. We're mostly going to be in Hydra. You're not going to get more than 40 or 50% from that most of the time, unless you're using him against Spider. And if you're using him against Spider, well, then you're going to get that full 100% probably. Finally, whenever an HP burn debuff activates, increase this champion's attack by 5%, stacks up to 50%, and resets each round. So as he is built in this form, he is really good against Spider because Spider only has the 1 round. And of course, they've got all the enemies, and he's good against Hydra. He would certainly not be too bad against Chimera as well if you're going to build the HP burn. And so in fact, he might be an interesting champion to try in Chimera at some point in time, but I'm not going to run that Chimera team right now. Maybe I'll fool around with him a little later and do a different video on him and Chimera. But Hydra and Spider really are the 2 places that this looks like this is going to be super good. Now, even against the Chimera, that HP burn is going to be, you know, only the 10% extra crit damage. So the crit damage is not going to scale quite as much. But for Hydra and other stuff, that's not too bad. So let's go take a look at his other form, though. Again, go back into the bug form. He looks pretty good in this. This is all about control, and it's okay, but it's not exactly the kit you're looking for when you get a mythic. And that's, I think, the real problem for it. Attacks one enemy, places increased accuracy buff on the ally with the highest accuracy for 2 turns, and fills their turn meter by 10%. Interesting, not the worst A1. A little weird that it's random turn, not random, but you can sort of control this, but it's still kind of interesting. Interestingly enough, this increased accuracy, if there's other people with increased accuracy, this could be a different champion depending on who has increased accuracy active versus doesn't. So, AoE stun on all enemies for 1 turn. Place a continuous heal buff on all allies for 2 turns. Not bad for wave clear. Books down to 3-turn cooldown. Ignores some resistance. The big problem with this ability is that while, yes, this gives some healing, which could be very good probably in Centranos. In fact, in Centranos, I'll probably find some pretty big uses for this dude. But outside of Centranos, you've got Armands, who's just straight up better. You have the Void Legendary in this faction that they just buffed, Tremere, I believe. She's better. So you've got at least 2 champions already that have a better, or at least as good a stun as this dude does, and are certainly a little more focused around that as well. But the continuous heals, not too bad. Finally, places a provoke debuff on all enemies for 1 turn. Also places a 25% strengthen and a 60% increased defense on all allies for 2 turns. Good defensive ability. Provoke is kind of nice. It's only a 1 turn. It does book to a 3-turn cooldown, so that's kind of nice. So he's got a 3-turn cooldown provoke and a 3-turn cooldown stun. So he's actually got some pretty good wave control content. But really, that is not where most endgame content is, other than Centranos. So will he be super useful in Centranos in this form? Oh, absolutely. He will be absolutely useful in this form in Centranos. But if you're struggling on the Doom Tower waves, there's a good chance you don't have any mythicals yet. Now, this guy will help you if you're struggling on Doom Tower waves with all that control, so I can't necessarily complain too much about it. But it still just kind of feels a little meh, combined with the fact that right now, we'll take a look at his passive, you either have to build him for damage on the first form or this form, and he really don't synergize particularly well. So when attacked, has a 100% chance of placing a weaken debuff and a 40% chance of placing a stun debuff on the attacker for 1 turn, so you can stun some of the people that are provoked into you. It increases this champion's defense by 1 point for every 2 points of attack when in their alternate form. So you build him for attack, and he gets some level of extra defense, which is good because he does do defense damage there and defense damage there, and this is not a defense, this is a place. Which, to be fair, a place is actually very, very nice, so it's not the worst thing that this is a place. But generally, he flips between attack and defense. He's got at least some way to turn some of his over attack into defense, so that's kind of helpful. You could certainly build him for a lot of damage, but in the arena, where you're going to want to do this, if this control is what you want in the arena, he has to change forms first of all, and then second of all, he does have to land a bunch of debuffs, which makes him sheep fodder, and you're not going to be able to build him for the damage probably because you're going to be needing to build him for arena control. And there are better champions that do the arena control. So basically overall, this form is just kind of disappointing and I don't quite know the best way to fix it. I mean, you could certainly do something like give him a counterattack every turn that he gets, for example, would be one way to get this out a little bit more. Or I don't know. Maybe he has some way of doing more damage against people under stun, or maybe he has ways to extend a stun debuff. I don't know. There's all kinds of things that I could think of that would make this form just a little bit better. Because right now it's an okay control form that's only really good in waves, and there's not a lot of really great wave content to use that type of form in. And I think that's pretty much why he feels very underwhelming. And meanwhile, as far as his main is concerned, this feels kind of underwhelming just because if this wasn't an issue here, if he instead have this, he puts the HP burns on, instantly activates, and then instantly activates them, you know, so put him on for 3 turns, then instantly activate him. That would be a better version of this form. And if that was the only change they made here, he would be so much better. Champions like Sulfurion place the HP burn and immediately activate it. There are champions that do that, and making a mythical that does that, I think, would be absolutely amazing. But we'll see how much damage he does. Let's go take a look at how I have him built, and then we'll take him into places and test him out. So this is the build I have him in. I have him in 6-piece Merciless and 3-piece Pinpoint. Now the Pinpoint is mostly to get the extra speed and accuracy, and I had a couple of really nice Pinpoint pieces that fit on him. He does need the accuracy. You do want him to be pretty high speed, so I've got him in speed boots here. I have an attack chest. I have crit damage on the gauntlets here, and then just, you know, general weapons for damage here. I did manage to get a crit damage amulet here, which is great. This is an accuracy banner. I don't know if he needs the accuracy banner because I'm probably going to be taking him into hard Hydra to do the comparison because I don't think he's going to make my Nightmare team over to Shiro. And I think the hard team's a good team to compare where he is, particularly because burns do better as a strategy on the lower levels versus the higher levels, just because the burn damage doesn't increase as you go higher in level. But the fact that you need to wait for people to take turns to get the burn damage just kind of seems less exciting. And then finally, I did not have an attack ring, but this is a mythical with with attack percentage and 2 hits in that, so that's a pretty high attack percentage, and it got me in Merciless 6-piece. So that was kind of my compromise here. Overall, we've got the stats here. So I've got 243 speed. Let me go improve myself here. We've got 6k attack. We've got almost 300 crit damage. You know, he's pretty decent. I've got the accuracy here as well. Not too bad. Overall, he should be very usable in a lot of areas with this build. Unbooked, he's not ready for Nightmare Chimera in this build because he does not have anywhere near enough accuracy. Booked, he will ignore, for example, 20% more resistance here and 20% more resistance here. Now there's no ignore resistance on this, so the decreased defense isn't going to necessarily proc, but you're looking for the burns, and actually, why is this ignoring defense? Oh, because it extends the duration of buffs. Okay, that is ignoring resistance because it's extending the duration of buffs, so you do need accuracy for that, so that makes some sense. I gave him Nature's Wrath. I think that is the most effective blessing on him until you can get to 6-star, when Crushing Rend is certainly going to be very good. You could certainly argue that Soul Reap would not be too bad if you're going to take him into Arena. If you really want all the burns, you could try to do an Incinerate build. Because he doesn't ignite the burns that he places, I don't think the Incinerate build is going to be quite as good as it could be otherwise, but Incinerate is a good way to get rid of Stone Skin and bring some additional damage in an Arena setting. Unfortunately, it doesn't work outside of Arena or Siege, so that's a little bit disappointing. But again, it does work in Siege, so it could be interesting in an all Dark Elves team as well. So that is an option. Again, Crushing Rend, if it's a 6-star, it's worth it because that'll work on every attack. If it's not a 6-star, it's probably not, unless you're using it for wave clear, at which point in time that's not quite as bad. Soul Reap could be interesting for Arena if you're using him as a damage dealer as well. We'll certainly see how good he does in damage. But honestly, I think overall for a long-term fight, Nature's Wrath is just great. That gives him a bunch of extra damage, maxed out for every debuff he places. He only needs to place 4 debuffs to max this out, and then he does 8% more damage every time he attacks, which I think is just overall really good. Obviously, if you can get this to 5-star, that's great, and 6-star, it's absolutely amazing, but at 6-star, you're probably going to want Crushing Rend. As far as masteries are concerned, a fairly standard PvE nuker masteries, so I went specifically over here. I like Life Drinker because I think it helps keep people alive in Hydra. You could certainly argue that Whirlwind of Death wouldn't be too bad if you're going to use them for wave clear, but if you're using it for wave control, that's not going to be quite as good. Cycle of Violence is not too bad, but I wanted to have both Cycle of Magic as well as Lore of Steel because of all the extra stats we are getting on the sets that we have, so that made some sense to me. Plus, Master Hexer is great because occasionally that means that you're going to get burns that will last an extra turn, which is a huge deal for burners, especially ones that ignite their own burn. Meanwhile, on this end, we went Helm Smasher because he's already ignoring defense. That makes some sense. Kill Streak, not super amazing. You could certainly argue that something else is going to go over here if we're going to focus on Hydra. But again, if he's going to do some wave clear or some damage even in Arena, Kill Streak will be great. Finally, the A1 Methodical seems like a good thing over a long fight that's going to add up to 10% extra damage to the A1. Nothing to complain about there. And again, bring it down. Good for the wave content, good for the Hydra content, not great for Arena. Well, actually, it's pretty good for Arena still because he's not an HP champion, so he should be fine. Single Out, pretty decent. And I'm assuming he's hopefully going to be mostly fully healed if I can have my team running properly. So this is as good as anything here on that flag. So this is as good as anything here on this particular row. Finally, as far as relics are concerned, I like the Coronet because that's damage increased by every time they place a debuff. So this is currently rolled up. So basically he places 10 debuffs and gets an additional 30% damage on him as well. That goes in well with his Nature's Wrath. You certainly could go in here and take a look at like the Malefic Talon right here would certainly be an interesting option as well because that's some additional crit damage. You could argue that the Cat's Gaze could be very good for him. Basically anything that brings additional damage is going to be good for this particular role. On the other hand, if you are going to be using him to taunt, maybe something like the Mask of Rage here might be okay because this helps damage on the provokes. But honestly, I don't think you want to lean on him as a provoker most of the time. So I think you're better off building him for some damage, which means you're going to want some of these damage ones that will generally work anyway. And the Coronet will work regardless because you're always going to be increasing how much debuffs you're going to do. So that's going to add a bunch of extra damage. Or just getting some extra crit damage and some extra stats could be very helpful for you. for you. All right, so first off, I'm actually going to bring Thor in here to this floor 1 to just kind of see what kind of damage Thor does, and then I will swap him out for Aphidus and see what kind of extra damage we're going to do. We do not want that on a full auto, and I don't want this to start. So we've got Arbiter adding the increased attack. We've got Lydia putting out the decreased defense and weaken. Let's slow this down to 1. And just for some reference, Thor's A3, 120 to 180k. Nice and easy. Let's go take a look at his A2 just to compare that as well. All right, so we've reset back here. Let's do the A1. I'll speed it up later. That's fine. Get that Lydia out there. So we got the decreased defense and weaken on everybody. Thor's A2, bunch of damage here. All right, so we went up to about 350k, anywhere between 160 to 350. Thor smacks. You guys know Thor smacks. He is an absolutely amazing champion. Let's just see if we're anywhere near Thor with Aphidus. Now, we do have affinity issues on this floor, but so does Thor, and so far we haven't really had any problem there. So let me go get Aphidus in, and let's check him out. All right, so we've got Aphidus here. We'll start this off with, now keep in mind, he does grow in power, and actually we don't have any affinity issues on this floor, so we're fine here. He does grow in power, so this damage here is the initial hits, and for wave clear hits, what you kind of want to expect. What should, however, happen is he should continue to grow in damage as well. So if we're close to Thor to start with, he should eventually gain more damage as well, because he'll kind of start rolling a little bit more just naturally with some of his passives. So, okay, not as good as Thor. Definitely was hitting somewhere between the 70,000 and 100,000, so not as good as we'd like. Let's restart this and try out his A2 just to kind of see where that goes. So the increased attack. And to be fair, one of the ones we saw low, I think we did get a 3% here of the weekend with Lydia as well. Got another 3% here. It's fine. So how does that A2 absolutely hit? Not as good as Thor's A2 as far as some of the later damage, but he was doing 160-ish on everyone that had weaken and decreased defense on. So somewhat in the range of Thor with the build that I have here right now. And I believe my Thor is in 6-piece Merciless as well. Obviously, you might have some Helm Smasher proccing or not proccing, so there's a little bit of variance. But he is not as good as Thor, which can kind of tell you how good Thor absolutely is. But Thor actually also does have a 5-star soul versus his 3-star soul, so there's a good chance Thor may actually have more crit damage than Aphidus does as well. So not bad. I'm actually a little surprised it was as much as it was. I was expecting it to be a lot weaker of a hit. So let's go take him into Hydra and compare him to Thor and see how that goes. All right, so I've moved myself back into the correct position, and here is the team that I generally run Thor in as well. So we've got Ugo here, we've got some additional damage dealer, a bunch of extra burns, so I think that's going to be good. Most of the hex comes from Michinaki here as well, so going to keep Michinaki into both teams and probably just swap out Thor. Honestly, I think I would probably test this team both with Thor, Michinaki, and see if which one of these I would swap out, because you do get additional increase attack with Aphidus, so I think that would actually possibly help Thor a little bit, although we get it with Duchess as well. So it's probably not the worst case scenario to have that again. So let's go take a look and see how much damage this team does, and then I will swap out back to this team to make sure we program Aphidus to stay in his normal form and see how much damage he does. Alrighty, so Thor managed to do 137 million damage, and we did a total of 237 million damage on the key, so that is very, very good. Michinaki bringing in a ton of damage as well. And to be fair, when I run this with Aphidus, he's going to be igniting some of the burns that Michinaki might put out as well. So Michinaki may actually see a rise in his damage just from the additional increased burns that are going to be doing damage to the Hydra boss as well. So this is good overall. This is actually going to be a really tough challenge, I think, for Aphidus to overcome, but it seems like the right move to kind of compare him and Thor, just to kind of put them in a neighborhood of what type of damage dealer is Aphidus really. All right, so we got Aphidus here, and this was obviously significantly less damage. Now this ran the full run as well, so they both went to a full 1,000 turns, and yeah, just not really impressed with Aphidus. Again, this might be partially a Thor problem more than anything else, because Thor is an absolutely amazing champion, but clearly Aphidus is a decent damage dealer. I mean, I understand a lot of you guys would probably not turn down a champion doing 88 million in Hydra, and he is certainly capable of doing that 88 million in Hydra, but He's just not bringing as much damage as somebody like Thor. He's not bringing as much control as somebody like Armand's. And as a mythical, you kind of expect him to be able to be as good as at least one of them in one of those roles. And because they're generally not a one that you're going to take a champion in to do both of them. Now, I certainly could program him to change back and forth to the different forms and use his provoke as well, but he's not going to keep that provoke up 100%. That's definitely going to require books to invest in him. And to be fair, he does not have books. That's going to add extra damage as well. But overall, he's just okay. He's not a bad champion. He's not an absolutely amazing banger of a champion either. And while that's fine, it's very frustrating to get a mythical that's just kind of okay. So that's Aphidus in a bug shell. He's a bug. He has some utility for wave clear, and I certainly didn't demonstrate that necessarily, but the build I have would certainly work with that. And an AoE stun and an AoE provoke on a wave clear can be a very good way to keep the wave nullified for the most part and let your damage dealers and other champions do their job while he mostly tanks it and keeps everyone from taking their turn. So does a good job of that. He's magic affinity, which means he's going to have force affinity issues, but for the most part, magic affinity is still pretty popular, very helpful in live arena, and other stuff is like that as well. The burns are decent, but I really do think that he's kind of hurt by the fact that he's not igniting his own burns when he lays them down in the first place. Because as a result, you need to hope that those burns are back by the time he gets to the 3-turn cooldown on his A3 a second time. So you're missing out on a lot of damage. Plus, since you also have to build him kind of as a raw damage dealer as well, you're kind of missing out on, hopefully you're killing people before you have to deal with a lot of the extra burns as well, even in Hydra. So is he a good champ? Yeah, he's still probably better than a lot of legendaries in this game. He's average for a mythical, maybe slightly below average. Is he a horrible, horrible champion? Are you going to regret getting him? Well, it really probably depends on where your account is. There are legendaries that do his job a little bit better. There are plenty of champions that, however, that don't really bring the combination of damage dealer, burner, and control that he brings. So if you're looking for somebody that does all three of those, or looking for a champion that's very flexible, and this is where the Centrano stuff comes in, I think he could be very, very good for an endgame account in some niche situations. So that is Aphidus. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed my bit of a breakdown on him. And if you get a chance, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. I really do appreciate it. If you want to help support me and my channel and or start a brand new raid account, use the link below. Get yourself a free Zargala and a free Ugo. Two really good epics that'll help you out through the early game all the way through the late game. Ugo is absolutely amazing everywhere, and Zargala brings a bunch of damage and some decreased defense that can be useful, especially early on. Just helps support me as well. So definitely appreciate you guys clicking that link, hitting that like button, smashing that subscribe button. You guys are absolutely amazing. And until the next video, I'm Bront CatHerder.